So again, starting point, factor everything as, can't factor the top, but the bottom is a difference of squares, x plus 5, x minus 5. Number 1, do we have any non-permissible values? X can't equal negative 5. X can't equal 5. What are those? Holes or asymptotes? They're both vertical asymptotes. Now, if you write VA on my quizzes or tests, I'll know that you mean vertical asymptotes. On the final exam, you don't know who's going to be marking your final exam. They may not know what VA means, or they could. So you should write it out a little bit clearer. But because what else could that apostrophe? Very agitated, and they might, I don't know. Who knows what that could also? Very angry, very agitated. Who knows? Okay. Number 2. Do we have any horizontal asymptotes? Since nothing simplifies, we go back to our original equation. The highest degree is a degree of 2. We have negative 2x squared on the top of our equation. We have 1x squared on the bottom of our equation. What does this simplify to? Negative 2. That means we have a hungry ape at y equals negative 2. So now that we've got all of our asymptotes, we can sketch. Asymptote at x equals negative 5. Asymptote at x equals, x equals 5. Another asymptote at y equals negative 2. X-intercepts and y-intercepts. Well, if you plug in 0 for x, can you see that you will get 0? If we plug in 0 for y, the only time that you will get a y-intercept is when the numerator is equal to 0. So you will get 0. Oh, we already had that. So we don't have a lot of information in this one. In fact, we don't even know for sure that this graph goes, it might, because that horizontal asymptote's in the middle, it might go down through that asymptote. We're not quite sure. But what we do know is 1 point. So let's figure out what is happening in this section, the first section here at the beginning. In order to do that, we're going to plug in a value in that section, negative 6. If I plug in negative 6 into my equation, what do I get? I get negative 72 on the top and 11 on the bottom. That's not too bad, is it? That's around negative 7. So as far as plugging that point in, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I have the point negative 6, negative 72 over 11. That tells me this section's going to look like this. Can you see that by plugging in 6? Oops. Positive 6, you will also get negative 72 over 11. Because you're squaring on the top and the bottom. It doesn't matter if it's a positive 6 or a negative 6. Okay, sure. Does it look at your original equation. If you plug in a positive or a negative and it gets squared, it's not going to make a difference. So this part over here is also going to look like this. What's going to happen in the middle? Well, we can find out what's happening if it goes up towards these asymptotes or down towards the asymptotes by looking at what happens as we get close to the asymptote. So we're going to check out 4 and negative 4. What happens when we plug in 4? We get negative 32 on the top, negative 9 on the bottom, 32 over 9, which is somewhere between 3 and 4. And the negative will be exactly the same. Okay, question number 3 for practice. Ask for domain and range. Okay, this is where things get a little bit interesting. For our domain, the domain is not bad. We know our non-permissible values. X can't equal negative 5. X can't equal 5. But X could be anything else. For our range gets a little bit interesting. Okay? Now, we're assuming things are symmetrical and that 0 is the smallest value. This would be a question that I'm almost certain that you would not get a range question on this graph on your exam. Because we're not certain that it doesn't go a little bit further down here, but some things about this equation, everything looks symmetrical all the way through. So I'm pretty sure that 0, 0 is going to be their smallest value. So as far as our range goes, our range is everything up to negative 2. Then there's a gap where there's nothing, and it starts again at 0. So this might be one where you feel more comfortable using interval notation, saying, I start at negative infinity. I have everything up until negative 2, but I can't include negative 2 because there's an asymptote. And then I start again at 0, include 0, and go all the way up to infinity. In the other way, it would look this way. You would write y is less than negative 2, or y is bigger than or equal to 0. So you still like that better? Okay. So you can choose either way for that one.